Welcome, everybody. I see at least one person with a camera. Can you nod if you hear me, Victor? Thank you. Okay, so let's start with some logistics for the course. As you have seen, well, let me start with office hours. Since you have an assignment due, I want to start the office hours. They will start tomorrow on Tuesday. There will be 2 sessions tomorrow. There will be 3 on Wednesday, 3 on Thursday, 4 on Friday, and maybe even 1 on Saturday, I forgot. So the way it works, you don't have to make an appointment and you can go to any office hours. But where do you find these office hours? Let me show you. Share screen, and we go to, all right, I'm gonna share my screen and go to Safari. If you go to Brightspace, the links are not there yet because I'm setting them up. TAs are setting them up each for their own office hour session. But the same way you have here lab Zoom links, tomorrow at some point you're going to see office hour Zoom links. So when you click on it, you will see right now it's individual labs. But when you click on office hour Zoom links, we will see tomorrow, I think there's one from 1 to 2:30 p.m. There's going to be Zoom link for that one. There's going to be another one in the afternoon. So on the Zoom links, you're going to have a list of all the office hours throughout the week. There will be 13 sessions. So in a specified time, on a specified date, if you want to join the office hours, you just click on that link in the particular time. So date and time and click on the specified list. So that's starting tomorrow. So you can join any office hours and get help for whatever, understanding the material, something you stuck in assignment and so on. Let me specify that the goal of the TAs is to help you with things like sometimes the idle doesn't work, or there's some syntax error that you really don't see, or you have other sorts of issues, or you're completely stuck. But the TAs are also instructed not to solve the assignment for you. So the goal is that you solve the problem yourself. It's more when you're stuck in some sort of really some specific Python things that are there to help you, not to solve the assignment for you. That is your goal. That's how you learn. By solving these questions. All right. The labs, again, you're going to have labs every week. The difference from last week is that starting with this week, the labs are actually for credit. The attendance is mandatory. The grade for the labs is based on your attendance. So basically, to get a full marks, you have to attend the lab and you have to make an effort to complete the questions that are exercises that are in the labs. There's no such thing as submitting the labs. You join the labs, you work on the exercises. There are always people who finish labs ahead of time. If you want to get your credit for the lab and leave it early, you have to try to get TA's attention. However, you will notice that most of the session have 60 or 70 students in them. The main concern and goal of the TAs is to help those who need help. That's the goal of the lab, is to get exercises, to have a TA there to help, and to understand and practice through that. So it's a secondary goal to the TA to check if somebody has completed their work and let them go early. That's kind of like a privilege to go early. So be patient, and when and if the TA finds time, they can look at your work. They may also ask you a few questions about your solution to make sure that you did do the work yourself. And in that case, you will get your points. Those of you who finish early. Those who haven't finished early, your job is to just be there during the labs and try to solve the exercises. To just make sure that people are trying, actually, every now and then TA are instructed to every now and then pick a person at random. They can even run the random number generator, pick somebody at random and ask them to show their work, what they're currently working on, are they stuck on something, and so on. And really, this is the goal of the labs, is to develop the skill to solve these types of problems. And by the way, your tests are much more likely to be in a style of the labs, because these are much shorter questions that you will typically get in assignment, not necessarily in the first assignment. As you can see, we have barely seen anything. So these are short questions, but already from a third or fourth assignment, you're going to get much bigger things to do for your assignments to code, which I can't necessarily ask you in the tests. So labs are more indicative of type of the questions that you may get to code in your tests. Okay, so starting with this week, your labs are for credit. All right, that was the second admin thing. As you have seen, hopefully, assignment number 3 has been posted. When you click on assignment, is there, you click assignment number 1, and you click on this PDF file, and it opens the assignment. So this is a good moment to remind you to please revisit the plagiarism policy. Your goal is to complete your assignment by yourself, because that's the way to learn. And if you use anybody's code or major solutions and hints from anybody, you are meant to write that either in a separate file or in the comments of your functions, where you have to give a reference to other people's work. That's the only way to not be accused of plagiarism. You may not get all the points if you majorly took solution from somebody else, but at least you're not going to be accused of plagiarism. So this includes your friends, and this includes anything online, the forums, the chats, any sort of group chats, and you will have to reference the work and of others that you received. Okay. So in order to complete so my goal for today, actually, and by the way, the place where you get reliable information about the assignment is the forum of the course. So already there are many. I strongly encourage you to go and read the questions that the students already asked about assignment number 1. There are 21 threads. I basically answered all of them, and often instantaneously. And this is the place to get answer for your question. Reliable answer for your question is on the course forum. So in order to complete the assignment, you have seen that when I posted the assignment, I said right now, and that was on Friday, you can already work on this and these questions. Actually, that's a wrong link. You have seen material to work on these questions, but my goal for today is to show you everything else that you need to complete the whole assignment. Okay, so what is that going to be? It's going to be, we're going to see strings. We are going to see how do you, a little bit more about print. You need to know a little bit more than we have seen, which is basically we did hello print, hello world. And then how do you get input from the user? Also how to convert between different data types, from strings to numbers, from numbers to strings, and so on. So these are the things that you will need in your assignment. So my goal is to show you all of these things today, such that then you can do all the questions in your assignment. By the way, in addition to that, and I will not be spending time on that, there are 2 questions, question 12 and question 3, that require you to return more than one value. I don't want to spend time explaining what type of data that is in Python. I'm just going to show you in one line how to do this. That's all you need to know to complete this assignment. I mean, to return multiple values. Unlike some other languages, Python allows you to return more than one value. And the way to do this is just to, let me open idle and show you in the terminal or in the shell. So you're going to do return. If you have two values to return, if you have one value to return, you've seen this, you can say return 10 or return whatever is stored in variable A. If you have two or more values to return, you're going to open parentheses, close parentheses, and put any values that you want to return separated by commas. So if you want to have two values that you want to return, let's say 10 and 15, I'm just using hard coding. For you, it's going to be variables. That's how you return two values. If you want to return 4 values, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now so you take any number of values that you want to return, you put them between parentheses. That's how you return more than one value. And you're going to only need this in question 3. And in the last question, because it asks you to return number of dollars and dimes and whatever else, right? So that's all you need to do. Actually, this type of data has a name in Python. It's called a tuple, but that's really not important right now. All you need and all you should be using is tuple. I see your hand. I will get to you, Ala. And finally, please pay attention to here. It says, right, because I keep on getting the questions on this on the forum and in person, I mean on these conversation from the students, that you have to, so please follow these rules, except for question 10, where you're drawing a rocket, where you can do whatever you want. You must solve this assignment without if statements, loops, branching statements, lists, and so on. The goal is that if I'm asking you, the goal is that you show me that you teach yourself the concept that we have seen in the first 2 weeks of class. This, for example, includes Boolean expression, mod operators, integer division, and how you solve things with these tools. So for example, some of these questions may be equivalent to saying, solve this problem by writing a Boolean expression. And then you may tell me, oh, I don't really know how to do that, but I know how to do it with if statements. Well, that's the same as saying, I don't know how to do this, but I would like to change a question and solve what I know how to solve. This is not how this works, right? I want you to demonstrate that you understand and can design Boolean expression and learn these things before we can move on. Don't worry, there will be plenty of time for your statements and loops and all these other things, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about strings. So what are the strings? It's basically a way for Python to represent a text. It's just data like any other data. What do I mean by them? So you have seen that Python knows what to do with the numbers. A number is just a piece of data that Python recognizes as such. It recognizes it as a number. In a sense, if you give it 2 numbers and put plus in between, it knows these are 2 numbers, and if you put a plus, it's going to add them, right? So it knows that, let's say, that type of data from everyday life. It knows numbers. We have also seen that it knows Boolean values. Like true and false, which we get as a result of comparison operator or Boolean expression. So this is another type of data, so you can do something with it. You can use it to test things. You have even used, you can even see the third data type, which is a none. Doesn't really matter right now what it is, but I mean, how exactly, what data type that is in Python, but it's there to represent to Python just nothing. So a none represents a value which means nothing for Python. Okay, so what, in addition to numbers and these Boolean values like true and false, some of the, basically the most common thing we use in addition to numbers, just text, right? So the way to present text in programming languages is via data type called strings. Okay, so here's how you would create a string, how you would tell Python, here's some text, maybe you want to print it, maybe you want to ask somebody questions, and so on. So let me start idle. By the way, today everything will be in the shell, because I just want to show you what Python knows about string, how you create them, how you manipulate them, and things like this, because we are learning about things that's much faster than me opening a file and creating a string. Then I have to use prints to demonstrate what happens to it, and so on. All right, so So here's how you create a string in Python. I'm going to start. There's actually 3 ways. Today we are going to see 2 of them. Which reminds me, there is one thing that you're not going to see today that is required in your assignment, which is how to document your function, how to write docstrings. It's a special type. For that, you use a type of string that can go over more than 1 line. But more importantly, what type of documentation you should put inside of each function, I will explain at the beginning of the next class. Okay, so that's but you can solve all the problem. It's just what type of info about your function you're going to put and how I'm going to explain. So you can solve it all just at the end at the comments, so-called docstrings in Python. All right, so how do you create a string? So let me show you one way to create a string is to start with a double quote, then you put any text you like. Let me use the same thing I used in previous class. This is a string. When you're done with the text that you want to create, or string that you want to create, you close double quotes. So you're telling Python by the first double quote, you're telling Python, I'm about to start the string. Then Python sees some text. It's looking for the second appearance of a double string. When it finds the second appearance of a double string, that means this is the end of the string. So the first double quote is the beginning of the string. The second double quote is the end of the string. So if I press enter now, you can see that Python actually generated a string. Okay, remember in Python shell, it immediately showing you displays you the result of the expression that you wrote. And this one, all it does, it creates a string. Typically, if you're creating a string or any values in programming languages, you will want to store it. You probably did it because most of the time when you do it, you will want to use it again for something. So in that case, or whenever you want to use it again for something, you can store it in the variable. So the same way we could store a number in a variable, we can do the same with a string. Okay, so I can take this string. So the right-hand side here, it creates a string. And then we have an assignment operator, and we have that variable assigned to the string, to the variable s. So if we ask Python to what is in S, it tells us that S is referring to this string. All right, so the string is, by the way, you see here, when I ask Python what is variable S referring to, it is showing me a string, but the first, this string starts with a single quote and ends with a single quote. And in fact, in Python, you can create a string the same way by start. So it's your choice. You as a program decide the way I want to create a string starting with a double quotes or starting with a single quotes. Okay, but if you start with a single quote, you should end with a single quote. Okay, that's so let's try another one. S2 is, this is also a string. So we created another string. This time we start a string with a single quote and we end the string with a single quote. So again, first one tells Python she's about to create a string. Then you have text. Oops, she shows me a second quote. So that's the end of the string. Why do we need these quotes? Is because Python needs to distinguish between that and this. For this, it's going to tell you, because otherwise, if you don't put the quotes, Python is not going to be able to distinguish between variable names, what is the part of your language, and what you just want to be some text that you're going to display to a user, or then you're going to ask a user, and so on. So the data type that represent text, if you want really just text, you have to tell Python that you are going to want to create a variable, not a variable, but you want to create a data type like that by putting the quotes around. Otherwise, as I said, if I do this whole thing, it just doesn't know what this is. It is going to think that this is, it's going to give you a syntax error, tells you I don't know what this is, and so on. Okay? So you have seen 2 ways to create strings in Python. One is starting with a single quote, the other one is starting with the double quotes. Okay, so you may think, why do you have 2? And in fact, other programming languages, at least last time I coded in Java for example, it didn't have this, but it can be kind of useful. Let me give you an example. So let's say that you want to create a string that contains somebody's quote. Okay, so here's the running example I have here. Let's say I want to create a string and it's a quote of a person. Okay, so I start by creating a string with a double quotes and I say famous and then normally when you give a quote, right, you put it under quotation. So here we want to quote what the person said. All right, so there is a quote, and now I want to end my string. So I put a double quote because I started with a double quote. Okay, so this crashes. And the reason this crashes is that the double quote is actually part of the text. And for Python, double quotes has a special meaning. If you started with double quote, then the double quote have a special meaning. The first time and it counters it again, it thinks that you are ending a string. So that's exactly what happens here. We are starting a string, then you follow, and then it counters the string again. And to Python, this says end the string. And it does. And you can actually see it from this coloring. Basically, it colors green the strings. You see the rest is not colored. And then you get this standard D and best and stuff. It doesn't know what it is. It says, what is that? And you get a syntax error. Okay. So at this point, you could think, oh, yes, this is where single quotes would be useful. If part of my text are actual double quotes, then I can start with the single quotes. And then Python will just look for a single quote for the end of the string. It's not going to react to a double quote. So let's test that theory. So I want to create a string that, so I'm starting with a single quote. And then actually you see it stays green. It didn't end the string when it encounters double quote because actually it's waiting for the single quote. The quote ending, then I'm ready to end the string. I put a single quote and now Python creates that string without any problems. So if as a part of your text, you have that part of your string or text that you want to make as a string, part of the text are double quotes, you might as well start with a single quote. Okay, if part of your text is a single quote, then you might as well start with a double quote. Such as, for example, let's say, let's play tennis. Okay, this one, if I started with a single quote and I should end with a single quote, well, we're in trouble again because that actually ends it here with like a single quote S. So therefore, because a single quote is part of my text, I better use double quotes for this particular string. Okay. All right, so I see some hands, but as I said, I'm going to try to teach a little bit and then get to your questions because I really would like to finish this material covered for the lecture, but we will get to your questions. My guess now, actually, often when I'm teaching this, immediately the hands go up and students say, what if part of the text that you want to represent a string has both double quotes and the single quotes? Okay, so here's an example. She said, what if we want to do this? I'll put in a comment. She said, let's go play tennis. Okay. So this is the, let's say you want a string that represents this text. Okay. So we have both double quotes and single quotes as part of the text. Okay, so why is this problematic in Python? Let's remember why it is problematic. The reason it's problematic is because these single quotes and double quotes have a special meaning. They actually cause action when it comes to string, right? So if you start with a double quote, the next time encounter a double quote, Python does an action and ends the string. So these special characters that have that cause an action in Python, you can tell Python to ignore that if you want it to just be part of the text, right? If you don't want Python to end the string or to do some special thing when it encounters one of these special characters with the meaning, you can tell Python to ignore it and to just make it be part of the text, right? So not to react to it, to make it part of the text. So the way to do this, and we need it in this, obviously, no matter what we pick. If we pick single quotes or double quotes, we need it. So let's say take another string. So it definitely would crash if I use double quotes here. We are in trouble because it would end it over there. So the way to do it is to tell Python. So let's say we want to start with a double quote, okay? And so now Python bumps into this double quote and ends the string, wants to end the string. If you want to tell Python, this is double quotes, but I want it as a part of the text, don't do action on it. You just put this sign, whatever that is, slash or double slash. So you do slash or double, sorry, slash or backslash. I'm not sure which one it is. I really should check that. So you see the string became green because we told Python, don't end the string here, just treat it as plain text. And then it continues looking for double quotes. And we do the same here. And then we end. It. So we want these quotes here and these quotes here to be part of the test, but these ones here and these ones here, I want them to start and end the string. Okay, so that work, as you can see, Python showed us that we created that string, and it's showing us that this is called escape character. Okay, so you can use it for various things. I'm going to show you a few that you will actually probably need to use in your assignments. I can't exactly remember, but some of them will definitely be useful for your assignments. Okay, so let me show you what else you can find. So let's say that you want to create a string that goes over several lines. So let's say you want to have a string that is something like this is line 1. This is, and then you see, I want to create a string with several lines. So I started to say this is line 1. And if I want the next part of the text to be in the second line, I press enter and you immediately get syntax error. Because why? Because the moment you press enter, again, it's one of those things that both in programming language and in the use of computer, enter causes an action. So the enter character on your keyboard is going to cause an action. Okay, so if you want to avoid that, if you actually want to create a string that is going to have a new line as a part of the text, again, you're going to use a special escape character. It's called escape character. This is line 1. Then you do escape character N. So escape character N stands for new line. Okay. Then you can say this is line 2, and then maybe /n, another new line. This is line 3, and maybe I'm done. So that's my string. Let me store it in some variable. Okay, so I have a string S. So you may say, okay, let me evaluate the string S and see if indeed it's going to have, this is line 1 in line 1, this is line 2 in line 2, and this is line 3 in line 3. Okay, so when I do this, I see that Python, that actually it doesn't show them in the new line. First of all, let's remember what we're doing here. We are in Python shell. This is meant for programmer, okay? So this is meant for somebody who knows what they're doing. They're using Python and they're telling you as a programmer what is stored in S is a string, and that string has this character in it, including these 2 new line characters. However, if you want to display this string to everyday humans, somebody that possibly has nothing to do with programming, they will have no idea what these things are. The print function, you have to use a print function. Print function is meant for user interface, is meant for not necessarily programmers. So look what happens when I do print S. Whenever N is encountered, it's going to go to a new line. Okay, So let me show. So what you have seen is that you have escape characters. If you want a single quote to be treated as a part of text, you just do this escape character single quote. You can do the same for the double quote. If you want enter character to be treated as a new line and not some special action, you do /n, or rather if you want new line, you use /n. Here's another one, is this /t. Hopefully you can guess what that does. So let's look at it. If I do print, let's say capital letter R /t capital letter B. Okay. So what is this going to print? Hopefully you can guess. /t stands for tab character on your keyboard. Again, one of those things that often have a special action. So this is going to print A, tab space, then B, as you can see here. This is quite useful if you want to print table, if you want tables, if you want to line things up. Then you may have different values separated by a tab sign, so they nicely line up if you wanna line up some nice characters. Okay, so if we look, I have some slides about this that I'm gonna share with you. So in addition to numbers and Boolean values, you have seen right now that in Python you can create objects of type string that I use to represent text, and that there are these special characters, /n for the new line, /tab for T, /single quote if you want a single quote to be printed rather than cause and actions, /double quotes if you want them to be printed rather than cause and action. And here's one actually that I didn't explain, but let me get to it. It goes to, when would you use this one here? So let's say that you want to print a message to somebody about what you learned today in class. And you want to say, okay, I'm going to tell a person the professor told us to use /n for the new line. Okay. And you want to print that to somebody to tell them what we covered today, other things. But look what happened. The professor told us to use, and then there's nothing there for the new line. That's because, again, this /n for Python is one of those special characters that causes an action. In particular, it causes us to go into the new line, and it doesn't display /n. But in this case, you actually wanted to print /n. Okay, so again, you want to tell Python, do not react to this as some action-inducing characters. Just print it as a plain text. And hopefully by now you can guess that if you want to tell Python, ignore whatever special action you have for this, that you just add a / in front of it. So now we have // which is actually showing what this is for. So it's telling Python, this /n character, treat it as a plain text. Let's see it now. And now it actually says the professor told us to use /n for the new line. This, by the way, brings me to another useful thing that you're going to use not only for strings, but for any other type of sequences, which is a very useful function called len. It's telling you the length of a sequence. What do I mean by that? So what is a string? Or even a text is a sequence of characters. So string is a sequence of characters. The keyword here is sequence. Sequence means, by the way, that there is order in the character, right? So it's not the same if you have a word with the same letters, but they're not in the same order. But that's on the side. So it's a sequence. I mean, we're going to get to that. Eventually, it's going to make a difference for some problems that we're trying to solve. But right now, what you need to know is that a string is a sequence of 0, 1, 2, 3, or more characters, okay? So strings, in that sense, have length. How many characters? You're asking how many characters does this string have? Okay, let's say we look at today. That string has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters, and we really get that. By the way, it's the numbers. Numbers don't have length, right? So Python 3 and other languages, you treat a number as a unit, right? It's an integer, it's a float. There is no such thing as what's the length of the number, right? Where you can ask what's the length of the sequence. So you can use this len on strings for now. Later on, when we do lists, which is sequence of various objects, various values, you can ask how many elements does my list have. Right now, you're asking how many characters does my string have with this len. So let's look at one of the things that we just covered, which is, let's look at this string. Let's go back to the string, which was character A/T, character B. Okay, so we have that string, and I want to ask how many, what is len of S going to do? Is it going to, what value is going to get? So usually in class, when I ask this question, I get at least half the people say 4, which is completely understandable, because when you're looking at this, it looks like there's 4 characters, A/TB. However, this /T is actually representing one character on keyboard, which is a tab character. Okay, so if you ask Python, what is the length of this string? It's 3. Okay, A tab B, and in fact, and really, if you print it as we have seen, it prints 3. It's like hitting 3 things on a keyboard. A tab B. Okay, the similar things go for /n. /n is 1 character. Okay, so len, if I just do /n, the length of this string is 1. It's just enter character. By the way, let's look at this string. I'm creating a string. I press single quote and then immediately single quote. Okay, so what is this? So I start a string and the string immediately. This is so-called empty string. It's a string with no characters. And you may think, what is that useful for? But in fact, it's used a lot. When you want to create new strings, accumulate some values in it, we will see, you will see it when we get there, but it's a quite useful string. Do not mix it with this. S is equal, I do a single quote, then I hit a space bar, and then I put a single quote again. So this thing here and this thing here are not the same. This is a string that does have 1 character. It just turns out to be a space character, okay? So len of this thing is 1 because it has 1 character, which is corresponds to the space bar. In fact, you can hit it as many times along. 1, 2, 3, okay? And now len of S is 3 because the content of the string is 3 space bars. Okay, so let me, where am I? I'm gonna get to the questions, but I first want to wrap up what you can do with the strings. Let me make sure I don't skip something because as I said, you're going to need some of these things in assignment. So here's the thing that you're going to need in your assignment. Or you will find it useful, I think. At least I used it when I solved it, okay? So here's something that you can do with strings. So let's say you have some string like this, rock, and I create another one, climbing. Okay, so I have 2 strings. One of the common things that you do with text is that you concatenate it. You probably do it often, right? You copy paste something from your email, copy paste something else and put it one after another. You are concatenating 2 pieces of text. So in Python, you use a plus operator for that. You use it in other programming languages as well. So if you have a string and you have another string and you put plus between them, Python is going to create a new string where it concatenated the given 2 strings. So we are creating a new string. I'm going to call it X. So we're going to see what's in X. Okay, so we did S plus T, where S is a string and T is a string.
They're going to be attached together.
Can you please mute yourself, whoever is speaking? So let's see what's in X, okay? Often there is some surprise when I press X here. It's just because humans would naturally assume that there is a space between rock and climbing, but computers do exactly what you tell them to do. So this plus means glue rock, glue string S, start with string S, and then immediately after that, glue string T. There is no space, and you get a new string, which is rock climbing without space. You may wonder, okay, so what if I actually wanted to add a space there? Okay, how do I do that? Do I have to change S and T? No, let's see, let's try to do it. I want to start with S, okay? After S, I want a space. Well, we've seen a space string. Here's a string that has a one space character. I use a concatenation to add a space right after S, concatenate to S. After that space, I want to add whatever is in this string T, okay? So I add T to that, right? So this expression here is going to start with a string S, it's gonna add a space, and then it's gonna add climbing, add concatenate. By add, I mean concatenate. Let's store that in a different variable. Let's say variable x2, and let's see what is in x2. We indeed have space. Okay, so you use a plus sign if both of the operands on the side of the plus are strings. Python is going to concatenate the two strings. And here's actually a good time to remind you of how Python knows what to do, because when we did 3 plus 5, it did the mod plus. When we did S plus T, it did concatenation, okay? So this is why I insist that, and this is now a simple example, later on it may cause bigger problems if one doesn't understand types and what their use is in programming languages. So how does Python know what to do? Because it knows types. That's why I'm also insisting on them. So let me show you this. So let's see what type of data. So we have a S and we have a T. Let's say A is equal to 5. We have this variable S, T, and A. If I remember this function type, if I ask Python what is stored in S, it tells me it's an object of type str, which stands for string. Okay, and let's me ask, what about T? Another one, it's a string. What about A? It's an integer. Okay, so when you do S plus T, Python sees an operand plus and wonders, what should I do? Concatenation or math, or yet another thing that actually, it can be various things. The way it determines this, it looks at the types of the two operands. If they are both strings, it's going to concatenate them. If they are both numbers, it's going to do math plus. Python also doesn't allow you to mix types, okay? You may think that if I have a string, I say the year is, sorry, that is not, I didn't want to end it. The year is, and then I want to concatenate 2020. Python is not going to let you do this because it sees a plus operand. Yeah, and you have two operands, sorry, plus operator, you have two operands. The first one is a string. The second one is an int, and it doesn't allow you to mix the types. We're gonna see how you convert between these such that you can glue 2020 to the string. I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that in the middle, in a moment. So you have seen right now that if you apply plus to two strings, Python is going to concatenate it. Okay. What about, let me clear this up. ST, these are the two things that we have. What if I say, oh, how is it? So what if I try to divide S and T? You know, you can do math plus, maybe you can do a plus, maybe you can do a divide. It says you can divide, you can apply this operator to two strings. And it really makes sense. Like, what would it even mean to divide a text by text? It doesn't make any difference, so nobody, doesn't make any sense, so nobody coded it, right? Because it doesn't make any sense. However, this one, if I ask you, what about this? 4 times la. Could you guess, would this possibly have some reasonable thing, like a reasonable explanation? Okay, would you guess what it does? I think most of you would. You would guess that 4 times la is going to produce a new string that repeats this given string 4 times. Okay, so it produces a new string where the given string is concatenated basically 4 times. Okay, but here again, it's important to know the types. You can apply multiplication operator to 2 numbers, as we have seen it. 2 times 4 is 8. It knows that. And if you do an integer time a string, it's going to create a new string where it repeats the given integer, in this case 4 times, or in a given number of times. Okay, so it knows what to do with the multiplication if one operand is an integer and the other one is a string. All right. What about this? 4 times 0 times la. Well, this is going to crash. Again, you need to know your types, right? So this is a float times, and it's telling you can't multiply non-int type, so a float and a string. You can't multiply them. And you may think, why? I mean, this is the same. However, remember floats, it could be, somebody can do something like this. What would this mean? There's no reasonable meaning for this, right? And a consistent meaning for this, so nobody coded this. So the only thing that is coded is that when you have multiplication operator and one is an int, one is a string, that's going to work, so you need to know your types. So Python, when it says multiplication operator, looks at the 2 operands. If they're both numbers, it applies math multiplication. If it's an int and a string, it does, well, what you've seen here, it does this. Okay, so, I'm going to now spend some time first briefly revisiting print, because all we actually saw so far is print hello world, I think, maybe some other small things, such that you can understand how calls to print function work, especially because students often confuse creating a string and print function that is actually very powerful, that can glue things together and make sentences. And then I'm gonna talk about input, how you ask user for input, okay? Like give me a number, where you wanna go and things like this, because actually that is a part of your assignment. By the way, when your assignment says the function prompts the user for the name of the city, that means you are going to, inside of the function, say, give me a name of the city. You're going to capture the answer of the user and make it part of your poem. Okay, like in my example. All right, so there's another places where you also have, you prompt the user. That means you ask for input. All right, so let's see. But before we ask for input, let's revisit a print function. So here's something important to understand about print function. Print function is very powerful, and like any other call, remember last time we did area of triangle, that function required you to give it 2 values. In other words, 2 arguments if you're going to use a proper lingo. So when you're sending more than 1 value to a function, you separate it by a comma. So let's say we had 2, 10. We are sending 2 values, base is a 2 and height was a 10. Print function can take from 0 to many values. Print, let me leave it with 2 and 10, right? If you give print, this again are just arguments. Argument first, sending it 2 numbers. I'm sending it number 2 and number 10, and print is going to print them. So print, you can send it arbitrary many values separated by commas, and print will print them. It will, when it prints, it's going to replace comma by space, not replace. This is not replacement, it's just when it sees the next argument, it's going to print first space, then the next argument. So it prints first the first argument, say, okay, my next argument is 10, I'm going to put space, and then the next argument. Okay, so let's see what I mean by some other examples. So this is a call to a print function with 0 argument. I'm not giving it any values or objects to display. In this case, print is going to print a new line. You see here it skipped a line. Okay, you can give it a 1 value. So we saw this is a string, all right? Okay, contrast this with this. So you may think, wait a minute, this is not 1 value. Yes, it is. That is 1 string. There is no commas. You're sending print statement, print function, you're sending 1 object, you're sending it 1 string. Here's the beginning of the string, here's the end of that string. So this is a call to print function where you're sending 1 value. This is a call to print function where you're sending 2 values. Now to go back to the question that the student asked, we have 2 here. Oh, all right, let's do this. S is a rock, B is climbing, all right? Oh, B, okay. So print, if I do S, I first send a string S and then I send a string T. This is a function called to function print, where I send it 2 values. So it has 2 arguments separated by comma. The first is a string rock. The second is a string climbing. So print is going to do what print does. It's going to print the first value, then space, then the second value. Okay? This is different from print. So this here we are sending 2 values to print function in our print call. This is different from S plus T. Okay, so let's look at what this does. This, first of all, in order for print to know what to print, it first has to evaluate this expression, S plus T. S is a string, B is a string, S plus T creates a new string, rock climbing. That's a 1 argument. 1 object is a new string, rock climbing, that is sent to print function. So this here is a call to print function with 1 argument, 1 value. Is sending 1 string after this action is performed. Okay, you can actually send many values, as I mentioned, to print function. They don't have to be of the same type. You can do print S, then print number 105. It may not make any sense. Then print T, then print today. Okay, so here we are using print. We are sending 1 value, comma. So that means this is the second value. It just finished. Third value, fourth value. So we are sending 4 values of 4. This function call has 4 arguments, and each is printed and space is put between them. That's how print works. Okay. It's going to display arguments, values you give it 1 by 1. And between 2 consecutive arguments, it's going to put a space. So this is very useful because you can already do things like, let's say you ask a user for some number and it gives you number 10. And then you want to print them some helpful message. You can say, oh, I want to write a program that tells the user what is the square of a number. You can do that in 1 print statement. You want to print a meaningful message. So this is how typically you would do. What do I want to print? The square of, and then 10 is 100, right? You want to print a message like this. So the square of is a text. Therefore, it's a Q. I should create a string. The square of, but now I want to display this X, right? What's in X, all right? So I end my string and tell and give the next value that I want printed to print function. So that's going to be 10, right? The square of X. What do I want to do now? Is, well, is text, so I create a string. What do I want to display next is the square of X. Well, then I want to send it the next value, and in fact, that next value can be a formula, which is here X squared, and there it is. So let's see, the square of 10 is 100. Okay, so if I change 10 to 4.5, I can run this again, and you see that it's printing a meaningful message. Okay, that's often how you use it. So in this particular print call, This particular print call has 4 arguments. We are sending 4 values. First is a string, then a number, then a string, then another number. Okay, so that's how, this is something you will have to do similar in your assignment. But now the things that you haven't seen in the that you haven't seen yet, and print you've seen a little bit. By the way, let's go back to what you've done in the first class. Hopefully now you know what you did. Hello world, although probably even then you probably kind of at least intuitively understood what you did. But this thing here creates one string, a hello world string, and then you send it to a print function to print. So you could have done something like s hello world, this is equivalent, and no print s. All right, so now how do you ask a user for input? This is super useful. It's very likely that you will often need it. Here's a simple example. Let's say you want to pay some bill, you go to your bank account, you click on this electricity, I want to pay my electricity bill, and the software is asking you how much you want to pay. So you, a user, have to give some data, in this particular case, a number, most likely a float, because your bill is not going to be around integer, likely. So you need to be able to ask a user a question and capture the answer. And you're lucky with Python, it's absolutely the simplest way to capture users' data of any of the programming languages I've seen. It's a beauty, okay? And so here's how you use it. So you want to ask a question, and you can even guess the name of the function. The function is called input. Like any other function call, you use the name of the function, then you open parentheses, close parentheses. And now already like this, you can use it without putting any value inside of anything inside of the parentheses. So with 0 value, 0 arguments, you can make this call. If I press a button, you will see that a cursor is just blinking there, waiting for me to enter something. So that's what function input does. It's going to wait for me to enter something. When I press enter, it's going to return whatever I entered. But okay, so here's more common use for it. More commonly, you are going to actually ask some question to user. You're going to want to ask a question, and you can put that question inside of these parentheses in the form of a string. So for example, let's pretend I'm designing some software for a travel agency or for ticket purchasing, and I want to ask several questions to a user. Maybe the first one is, what's your name? So that I can put it later on the ticket if I'm selling tickets. So here's how to do it. You just put a string inside of this input and you ask, what is your name? Okay. So what this function does is going to display this question that you put inside of the parentheses. It's going to display the string. Then you're going to see a cursor blinking. It's going to wait for your answer. Once you type in your answer, press enter, it's going to return whatever you entered. So if I want to capture, which is the point of asking the question, you want to capture what the answer is, I have to, of course, use a variable for that. So what's your name? I'm going to give a variable. So this is my variable called name. So whatever I enter input is going to return it and store it in variable name. So let's try that. As promised, this string that I gave as argument in a call to input function is displayed, and we have a cursor waiting for my answer. I'm going to type Vida and then press enter, and this, whatever I entered, will be returned in a form of a string. So input function always returns a string. No matter what you type, if you type a number, it's still going to return a string. We're going to see what that means and what are the implications. But let's see what's stored. Here, indeed, we see that I typed Vida and a string Vida is stored in variable name. So that means I can use it now. All right. By the way, unlike print function, you can use input function only with 0 or 1 argument. Okay. So you cannot send it to argument. Let me show you an example. Maybe next thing you want to be fancy and you want to use my name. Maybe next thing you want to ask input, where do you want to travel? And then you want to use my name, right? For that, you would need to do this name. So you may want to think, I'm going to do this like in a print function. I am going to store where a person, let's say it's a city, I expect a city, press enter, and it tells you that input expects at most 1 argument, not 2. So input function, you can give it 0. You can give it 0 arguments. So then it's just going to blink. It's not wait for you to enter something. It's not going to ask the question. Or if you give it a string, it's going to display the string and then it's going to wait. But if you do, you may want, you may want to say, oh, but I want that. I want to ask question like this. Well, you just learn how to do it. If it accepts 1 string, you just make 1 string out of using concatenation. So you could just do this, right? So you have 1 string, I concatenate my name to it, and maybe I even want to be fancy and concatenate, use a proper grammar and put a question mark there and then a space. See, where do you want to travel, Vida? Okay, here's where I want to go. Badly, but that's okay. So let's see. Is it stored there? Rio is stored in the answer. Okay, so last thing last, let's say I want to ask a last question, which is I want to ask them how long they want to stay. How long you want to stay in Europe? So maybe I can do, how many days do you want to stay in, let's be a little bit fancy again, if it can be called fancy, in city. Okay. And I want to store this in a variable duration. Okay, so I'm asking how many days do you want to stay there? Okay, and I want to stay 10 days. Please let's pay attention. This is the cause of many mistakes. What's stored in duration? Let's look at it. Duration, I have to spell it correctly first. It is not number 10. It's not integer 10. It is a string that looks like 10. It's a string whose contents are characters 1 and 0. Okay, you know it's a string because Python is telling you it's starting with a quote and ending with a quote. So what's stored in duration is a string. Okay, maybe that's fine for what you want to do, but maybe it's not. Maybe you need that number. Maybe you're thinking, okay, I want to tell her how long her total trip is going to be. It takes a day to go to Rio, to fly there. It takes a day to come back. So the total duration of vacation that you need or something is duration of the trip you want plus 2. Let's say I want to display this message like that. Your your trip is going to last in total this much. However, notice what Python tells you. You're trying, well, first of all, I misspelled it, so it's not the mistake I wanted to show you. Okay, it's this one. Duration is a string. Remember how Python figures out what should I do with this plus? It looks at the operands. It figures out that duration is a string. So I should do concatenation because you're starting with a string. But then the second thing is an int, and it doesn't let you do that. Okay, it doesn't. You cannot mix the types because you can think of it as gets confused. Should I do math plus or should I do concatenation? Okay, so in some other languages, there's some sort of implicit conversion here, not in Python. You cannot mix the types. So therefore, if you really wanted this duration to be turned into a number, you can do it, but you have to do it explicitly. The command for that is if you have a string that looks like an integer, you can convert it to integer, or rather you can create a new integer that looks like that string by a command, and you guess it is int. So let's do it, duration. So this, we're not a command, a function. You give it a string that looks like an integer. When you press enter, you see this function will return a new string that is actually an integer that looks like your given string. Notice that this did not change the variable duration. Duration is still a string. If you want to change a variable, you have to assign value to it. So if you in fact wanted to that your variable duration holds an integer, you have to change it. You have to assign that value to it. So first we convert to int, and then I assign that integer to my variable. So this assigns this new value to variable duration. So now duration is actually an integer 10. Now I can use it as a number. Now it's not going to crash if I do duration plus 10, if I spell this correctly. Okay, so this is, if you heard of casting, but if you don't, again, it's one of the fancy names in programming languages again. But all it does, so this is sometimes called casting operator, but this int function is just a function that creates an integer. If you give it something that looks like an integer, it's going to create an integer. It doesn't do conversion. It did not convert duration. It created a new object, which is an integer. Okay. Let's see if you're paying your bills. You know, maybe you're paying something is $83.4. The user enters that. You shouldn't use and you want it as a number. Let's say you shouldn't use an int, because int is used for creating integers, and here you have a string that looks like a float. So if you're expecting a float, you should convert a float function. If you give it a string that looks like a float, it's going to actually produce a floating number that then you can use for whatever, if you're going to do some mathematical things or anything else that you can do with the numbers. So int and float are functions that produce, this one produces a new integer, this one produces a new float. If your input is a string, then to int, you have to give a string that looks like an integer, and to a float, you have to give a string that looks like a float, okay? By the way, you know, by this, we don't mean that. Let's say this one. If you give it something that doesn't look like a number, even if it spells a number like this, of course you're going to get, it has to look like an actual number with digits, all right? Not to mention that this doesn't make sense, right? So that's gonna crash. So you have to int function, you have to give an integer that looks like you have to give if it's a string that you are converting, you have to give it a string that looks like an integer. To float function, you have to give a string that looks like a float. Okay, you can give different other types of data to this function to convert. Sometimes you may want to take a float and convert it into an integer. So if you give an int 7.5, it's going, if you give it a float, it's going to take that float and convert it an integer by just cutting off the decimal places. So you get an int like that. So this is sometimes useful, and I think I used it in my solution to your assignment. Maybe there are other ways. I'm just telling you, I did find it useful for something. If you do int, I don't know, you take some number, 0.99, this is not rounding. This just cuts off again the decimal places. So it's gonna take a float and make it look like an integer by cutting off decimal places. You also can create a float from an integer. If you give it integer 2, it's going to create an equivalent integer by adding equivalent floating point number by adding 0.0 to it. So this is, you have seen how to convert from strings that looks like integer to integers, from string that looks like floats to floats, and between integers and floats. And last thing to see is this, because Python doesn't allow you to mix type. Let's see, we have something like, I have a string S1 is a string like the year is, or yeah, okay, let's say the year is, and string S2 is a number, an actual integer. And maybe you want to print a message, actually. Print S1, no, let's say I want to create a new string, which is S1 plus S2. And this is going to crash because S1 is a string, and you have actually seen this mistake, and S2 is an integer. In Python, you cannot mix the types with the plus operand. But maybe in this particular case, all you really want is to concatenate these two. Let me just do this again. So S1 is the year is, and S1 is equal the year is. S2 is a number 2020. All we want, if we want to glue these together, in this case, because I want to concatenate them, I want both of them to be treated as strings. I want to concatenate the two. In that case, you can use str, which is a function that creates strings. So if you do str, if you give str an integer, it's going to create a string that looks like that integer. If you give it a float, it's going to create a float that looks like that integer. But because it converts or creates a string, you can use it then in this concatenation. So if you do S1 plus, I convert to a string S2, now we're not going to get a mistake. It will indeed, it will first convert this S2, which is S2, sorry, S2, which is a number. Is going to first create a string equivalent to this, and then it's going to concatenate it to S1. All right, that's all that I wanted to show you for today. I will stay about 10-15 minutes for questions. Those who don't have questions, you are free to go. Those who would like to ask question, I will let you unmute yourself now. So let's see. First person I have on the list is Ala.